Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Yes, welcome everyone to this Montana Book Festival event featuring debut novelists Robin McLean, Elizabeth Gonzalez James, and Dianna Rostad. This is You Always Remember Your First Debut Novelists in Conversation. This event and the Montana Book Festival is proudly sponsored by Arts Missoula. My name is Lauren Korn. I'm the director of the Montana Book Festival. I am zooming in from my office in the Mountain Press Publishing Company building here in Missoula, Montana. The Montana Book Festival acknowledges that we are in the Aboriginal territories of the Salish and Kalispel people. The name Missoula comes from the Bitterroot Salish word in Misuletko, which means place of freezing water. This name has been used for over 12,000 years since the existence of glacial Lake Missoula. The first Europeans who came here borrowed the Salish term in Misuletko and modified the word to Missoula. Later, when glacial Lake Missoula melted, the Bitterroot Salish began using an additional term for Missoula, which means place of the small bull trout. In 1855, the Bitterroot Salish were forced to sign the Hellgate Treaty, and following this treaty, the United States government carried out forced assimilation, removal, and genocide against the Salish and other peoples in their efforts to acquire land. Yet despite centuries of colonial theft and oppression, the Tuchakan people are still here and thriving on their Aboriginal lands. The Montana Book Festival strives, and we will continue to strive, to help promote Indigenous voices as one of the ways our organization acknowledges and respects the Aboriginal peoples of Missoula. For those of you zooming in from outside of Missoula, including our authors this evening, I encourage you to let us know where you're zooming in from. There's a link in the chat that can help you identify which territories you are currently occupying. And if you'd like, I encourage you to throw your locations into the chat. A few logistics before I hand things over to our authors to begin their reading and conversation. I'd like you, attendees, to submit your questions via the Q&A at the bottom of your screens. Your questions will be addressed throughout the hour as the authors see fit. And you can too feel free to use the chat function to talk amongst yourselves while the event is taking place. Kim Berry, one of our MBF volunteers, is on the back end of things, and they'll be throwing in links to the books at Fact and Fiction. Including Robin's is not yet out, but there is a pre-order link at Fact and Fiction that you can use. Yeah, and then both Kim and I will be on the back end of things just to monitor any logistical questions you have. Okay. And with that, I think I'm going to introduce our authors this evening. So before becoming a writer, Elizabeth Gonzalez James was a waitress, a pollster, an Avon lady, and an opera singer. Her stories and essays have appeared in the Idaho Review, the Rumpus, StorySouth, PANK, and elsewhere, and have received numerous Pushcart Prizes and Best of the Net nominations. She is the interviews editor at the Rumpus, as well as a regular contributor to Ploughshares Blog. Her first novel, Mona at Sea, was a finalist in the 2019 SFWP Literary Awards, judged by Carmen Maria Machado, and is available now from Santa Fe Writers Project. Originally from South Texas, Elizabeth now lives with her family in Massachusetts. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Robin McLean worked as a lawyer and then a potter in the woods of Alaska before turning to writing. Her story collection, Reptile House, won the 2013 BOA Editions Fiction Prize and was twice a finalist for the Flannery O'Connor Short Story Prize. She now lives and teaches in the High Plains Desert of Central Nevada at Ike's Canyon Ranch Writers Retreat, which she co-founded. And I'll show the book. Hi, Robin.
Hi there. Thank you for having me. I do not have a copy of that, so it's fun for me to see it.
Oh, I wish I could like zoom it to you somehow. We're not quite in that age of the future, I guess, yet. But yeah, isn't it beautiful?
It is beautiful.
Yes.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and our third author, Dianna Rostad, was born and raised in the Pacific Northwest. Her parents and extended family come from the ranches of Montana and the farms of Arkansas. Dianna raised three kind human beings, and when they began to test their wings, she took to writing with a passion, completing Southern Methodist University Writers Path program in 2009. A favorite task of her creative endeavors is the discovery and research of people and places where her novels are set. Oh, and I need to remember to do this. She has traveled extensively to pursue the last artifacts of our shared history and breathe life, truth, and hope into her novels. Now living in Florida, Dianna continues to write big-hearted novels for wide audiences everywhere. Welcome, Dianna.
Hey, Montana. Thanks for having me, Lauren.
Yeah, of course. I'm just going to let the three of you take it away. Thank you for being here, and I'll come back in towards the end. All right.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, hello, everyone out there. Who wants to start? Elizabeth, Robin, who wants to go first? I think what we're going to do is we're going to tell you a little bit about our book, and then we're going to read just a short page for you out of our book. So who wants to start?
I can start. Okay, so my debut book is Mona at Sea. It's a dark comedy set during the Great Recession, and it's about a young woman who gets her first job out of college on Wall Street, and she gets there the first day, and oops, the firm went out of business over the weekend. And she has to move back in with her parents in suburban Tucson and basically figure out what she's going to do with the rest of her life. And so she started keeping a diary, and I'm going to read just a really quick little excerpt from the first entry in her diary. Chapter 1, I am born. She's going to start this exactly like Charles Dickens. My mother's parents didn't come to her wedding, couldn't endure the shame of seeing their Irish rose joined to a Mexican American with skin the color of a pecan shell. Within a year, my parents had me, and a year after, they had my brother Danny. I think my mother hastily made 2 new family members to replace the ones she'd lost. I grew up hearing the story how love had bested hate, but eventually I learned the unsaid kernel deep inside the tale, the one that caused me for years to look at mirrors quickly and always at a slant, was that I now carried something inside of me that might cause others, even my own family, to turn away. I remember the year I learned the sun was going to explode. My mother had an astronomy book that lived on the coffee table, and the back inside cover had full-color illustrations of the final stages of the sun, from yellow ball to angry giant to dead silent dwarf. I imagined all-consuming heat scorching everything on Earth, and the forever night that would follow. I had nightmares about fireballs, melting trees, a gloom swallowing every sound. My mother hid the astronomy book in the attic and enrolled me in a few after-school classes at the Y. By second grade, we had a day planner in which I could see my future meted out in 15-minute increments. All those little blocks, equally sized and neatly labeled, made me feel secure, confident I would always know what lay ahead. When you're told over and over what a smart kid you are, and when you win every science fair, every essay contest, it doesn't just go to your head, it defines you. I defined me. I became what people said I was, a winner, a genius, a singular talent. Losing becomes an abstract concept like infinity or world peace. I could think about it, but to see it or live it, that wouldn't compute. My middle name is Lisa, after my mother's mother, and Mona was tacked on, I assume, in a half-cocked bid to align me with greatness. I don't know what my parents were playing at, naming me after the most famous painting in the world, but if timeless beauty and silent grace are the summits I'm meant to reach, God knows they picked wrong. I'm a one-hit wonder, then nothing, nothing. Like the lady with the mystic smile. Thank you so much.
Wow.
I'll go ahead, Diana. I loved hearing that section, Elizabeth. I love your book, so it was great to hear that again. I'm going to read a little section from my novel called Pity the Beast. It's a Western, in which sort of typical Western in a lot of ways, like a lot of the typical stuff that you expect from a Western, where there's a ride out into the northern Rocky wilderness, and a woman is basically being followed by a sort of a modern day posse that's made up of a lot of people that she knows very well. And she's got to move across the wilderness, and she has the voice of her grandmother in her head. So I'm just going to read a small section where she has to cross a river, and she summons her grandmother's voice to do this. I'm just going to read a little part of it. This is for Dick Hull, because I see he's on here and he's a fisherman. Granny told her dear ones, when crossing a stout river, a woodsman finds a calm place, a pool of sorts. Deep and slow is what he's looking for. But mark this, the woodsman never trusts the pool. He tests it. He flings a stick in to see how it floats, where the current takes it, reads the river. If the stick rolls in the sun, takes its time, lolls and stays, the second stick too, and the third also, this last one winged far out as possible, then by all means, he rolls his cuffs up. But if the stick is spun and tipped and drowned, if it runs off like a tiny canoe, then the woodsman walks upstream. He keeps on the shore if the terrain and foliage allow it. He wades if he can, feels the water on his hips or chest, depending on depth. He studies the river with all his senses. The river is many things, a trap for land and creatures, a place for refuge for webbed-footed, a tank for fish, a highway for boats, also a bridge to over there, to freedom, the world's most expensive item. He shades his eyes. How deep? Where are the hidden rocks, the sweepers? He watches the surface movements, marks them, which indicate killing shifts below. He remembers fish live in calm currents, but also behind boulders where the water spins endless on itself, with finless, where finless swimmers cannot get out. Upstream, the woodsman finds where the river widens. It always does. A place where with riffles all the way across with luck. That's the ticket. He wades in, and if the current takes him, that's fine too. He paddles with all his might and exits the pool downstream. He knows already. That's it.
It's great. That is so atmospheric. Oh my gosh. And I think there might be a bit of some symbolism in there potentially. All right, so my book, You Belong Here Now, is about these three brave kids who take the orphan train and they head west and they end up on this cattle ranch in 1925 Montana. And they end up with Nara, who's 33 years old. She's brisk, she's hardened. And when she sees these kids, she wants nothing to do with them because the only thing she wants to do is run her father's very large cattle operation. So with that, and I'm not going to give you any more spoilers, I'll just read a little excerpt in the beginning of the book. Most of the Cheyenne in Yellowstone County wore their hair in two long braids with an old-fashioned hat. But Jim wore close-cropped hair, a Stetson, dungarees, and a long-sleeve shirts with a collar like every other cowpuncher. He held out a metal trap, its sharp teeth smeared in blood, and then dropped it in the dirt with a thunk. Found another tramp, lamed a calf. I had to shoot it. Nara shook her head. I wonder how many he laid before I fired him. No telling. I'm sorry Papa hired that idiot over your head. If I have anything to say about it, it won't happen again. His hair shone in the starlight and his chest filled with air as he contemplated her words. Our fathers are still angry. Another generation will bleed it out. Her father had grown up during the Battle of the Little Bighorn when Custer and his men had been slaughtered. But Custer had been hunting down Jim's people, trailing them as they moved their encampments with women and children. The animosity of that skirmish remained in the soil, angry blood of the fallen, bubbling up from time to time. Jim pulled a rumpled pack of cigarettes out of his chest pocket of his shirt, shook one out, and offered it to Nara. Her trembling finger took the white roll, and he watched as she put it between her lips. He fiddled around in his pocket and brought out a shiny metal lighter. His flicking thumb produced a flame that lit up his face and filled the air with the flammable smell of butane. His eyes were so dark she couldn't see inside him, but if she dared look too long, they'd flare up like that lighter, torrid and flustering. She puffed her cigarette to life and turned away. He lit his own cigarette, and they stood in the darkness of their own discrete worlds, connected by smoke and dust whipped up by the relentless north wind. All right. So that's Nara and Jim. Well, I have questions for you guys. I'm curious. So Robin and I kind of have this wild horse thing in common. She's got wild horses in her book. I've got wild horses in my book. So, my burning question to Robin is, what importance do wild horses have in your life and in your book?
Okay, so not only, well, I have some wild horses in the book, but I also have wild horses where I live. And so I live in this, I'm in Eureka, Nevada right now for this Zoom event, but I live about 70 miles from here, through desert, and 40 miles on a dirt road, and there's wild horses all around there. There's also antelope around there. It's a valley the size of Rhode Island with about 6 people in it. So I like to think of myself as living where they sort of belong and I don't. I get to live there to sort of see where they live. And I've lived in I lived in Alaska for a long time. I lived on a frozen lake in New Hampshire for a number of winters. And I think that the natural world is really, really important to the book. I would say probably the most significant difference between my book and a regular Western is that the beings and landscapes that are normally background in a Western are not background in this book. They are actors. And so the wild horses that I get to see every day, I have one character who's kind of obsessed with horses and wild horses and how long the horses have been in North America and stuff like that. But the wild horses themselves inform me while I was writing. So I'd say that's how they operate. How about you? I see you have your Mustang t-shirt on.
Yes, my blue one, Save the Wild Mustangs. I never knew we had wild horses out there until I started doing the research for my book. And I was just astounded. And since that time, just knowing that historically and even currently, they're still being destroyed for cattle forage, I've become involved in that movement. And I do sponsor some things, like I'm sponsoring Stay Wild with American Wild Horse Campaign, and also working with another photographer to sort of get this 20,000 letter campaign going, so we can just march up to the Capitol and say, look, stop it, stop rounding these beautiful things up, and it's funny that your character is trying to figure out, are they indigenous to North America? Because I know somebody who's written a piece on that, Yvette Running Horse Collin. Maybe you're familiar with her.
I mean, I've read a fair amount about the wild horse issue because it's such a big issue where I live. And, there's all kinds of scientific evidence about where they came from. And it's a really, really hot topic where we are. The roundups are happening and stuff like that. Yeah, they're beautiful. And so are so many of the wild animals that I've lived around in Alaska, the bears and the wolves, and all of those beings have informed my writing for a long time, and my life, hopefully, writing and living, kind of hopefully the same thing.
Well, that kind of goes into a question that I wanted to ask both of you, which was, in your books, you have such incredible visceral details about the natural world and about the animals. And I wanted to know, do you both have firsthand experience and closeness with animals? Because I grew up in the suburbs, and so we had cats, basically, and tarantulas. But so I have zero experience with animals, even though I do write about them sometimes. And then I have to spend a ton of time on YouTube. But I'm like, if I had just grown up on a cattle ranch, I would know this stuff already. So I'm curious, what is y'all's experience with that?
So, my aunt raises Arabians, and she had for years, and she'd always had horses besides. And so whenever we go back home, we'd spend time out in the horse fields, riding horses and doing that sort of thing. But when I was 12, we were all out in Hermiston, Oregon, and we were out on a trail by ourselves because it was the 70s. And, 6 kids on horses, who cares? Let them go. And a tin can rolled on the trail, and all of the horses reared and threw their riders. I was thrown off. got the wind knocked out of me. That's actually in my book. Charles has a lot of trouble with his Appaloosa horse, which they're known to be stubborn. And here's a city kid trying to ride a horse. So anyway, but after that, I didn't get on a horse until just recently. I was driving through Nevada in Robin's area, and I did see a bunch of wild horses out there. It was amazing. I got some video of them, but she put me back on a horse after so many years of being just scared of them, after, all of my youth, just standing in fields and, petting horses and whatnot. So that's been a great, great part of my summer, was reconnecting with them. So on that level. How about you, Robin?
Okay, so I grew up in a city like you, Elizabeth, cats, dogs, mice, pets, pets. So I'm not an expert or biologist or anything like that. I have gravitated kind of consistently towards places where wild animals are pretty intact. Where I lived in Alaska, there were black bears that crossed my path while I was hiking, and I got run over by a moose one time. But I now live in cattle country, and what you find, as you guys know, and everybody, any Montanans on this, people in rural areas, they are actually a lot experts on the natural world, and I've learned a lot about I've learned an awful lot about animals from my neighbors, and not that everybody agrees, but anyway, but I like being in places where I feel like a small being, where I'm probably way more vulnerable than any of the other animals that live around there besides me, the human animal. But I'm not an expert, but I'm moved by the natural world, and I want people to pay more attention to it. I would say it's true. But we need to ask you some stuff, Elizabeth.
Yes.
I've got a question for you. I would like to kick it off with I hope this is a good question, but I love the title of your book, and when I read it, I loved your book. It's really, really funny, and it takes on this really serious subject matter. And so I'm curious if you could talk about your predilection towards comedy and really serious subject matter, and if you can roll in like how the title came in, that would be awesome.
Yeah. So I originally wanted to, okay, hold on, let me back up, because I'm trying to answer both questions at the same time. Yes, comedy, I don't start out with the intent of writing comedy, but somehow a comedic voice just kind of ends up in my writing. And I knew that this book was going to be a comedy because the voice, when I started writing it, it was just like cracking jokes. And however, it's about a lot of really serious stuff. My character is unemployed. She engages in self-harm. She definitely has an unaddressed drinking problem. There's family stuff going on. And those are not funny things by any stretch. However, I think that by using comedy, I actually can get closer to subjects in that way than I could if I was just writing like a straight drama. I think that if I tried to write a dramatic story about somebody who had that particular set of problems, it would just be so unbearably depressing. I wouldn't want to read it, and I wouldn't ask anybody else to read it either. So I think that comedy actually, in a weird way, somehow lets me get more into tragedy. So I mentioned that my character engages in self-harm. I originally wanted to title the book Mona the Mutilator. And it was titled that, I think, through the rough draft. And my husband was like, do not, under any circumstance, call it this. That is a terrible title. You should never go with that. And I was like, okay, fine. So I went with Mona at Sea, which was inspired by a song by Jamie Cullum, who was like a British jazz singer from maybe 10 or so years ago. He has a song called All at Sea. And I like that term being all at sea because it typically means a period in which a person is confused and has no idea where they're going. But in that particular song, the narrator of the song is at sea, but he likes it. He wants to get through the confusion and the chaos in order to reach clarity later on. And so I kind of took that and put that into the title. My character is completely at sea, but it is only so that she can eventually get to a point of clarity and understanding.
Oh, that's fabulous. We have a question from the audience from Rebecca Starks, and she asks, she says, a question for all of you. I loved hearing a bit from each of your novels. Do you remember anything surprising while you were writing? Somewhere your book went you didn't expect it to? So I'll start by answering, and I'll say that, you know, and I began with Jim and Nara, and, you know, that tension, that sexual tension before them developed in, you know, and I didn't expect it to. I didn't want to write any bit of a romance in my novel, and not to say that this is a romantic novel, it's not, but they do have this thing where they, you know, they are so attracted to each other, and yet it's 1925, he's Native American and she's white, and it, you know, and I won't say the end, but yeah. So how about you, Robin? Anything surprising?
Well, I'm surprised that it turned into a novel. Like the whole thing. I would have said most of my life, which is going on about 15 years, that I was only short fiction. So I wrote this long short story, which it was basically too long to do anything with. It was about 50 pages long. And then I sat on it for several years, and then was sort of encouraged to with it as a novel, which I said, I'm not a novelist. Like I can't write novels. I don't know how to do that. So I'm just surprised that it's a novel. Like none of it after the first 50 pages was anything that I could visualize ever. How about you, Elizabeth?
I was surprised that I started writing this book kind of as my personal axe to grind about my own experience of long-term unemployment. Mm-hmm. And I think I was surprised as I went through drafts how much kind of compassion I felt for my character, because also at the beginning, she's a difficult person to love. And I think that I started the book out with a lot of anger, and I think it eventually came to a place of a lot of love and acceptance and compassion. And that whole experience was sort of surprising to me. And that also kind of maps like the maturation process that I probably went through in the last 10 years of getting this book ready for publication. So it was something beautiful actually to experience, and surprising for sure.
Well, I have a question for Robin. What power does Ginny have in your novel that you wish you had?
Okay, well, so Ginny is sort of, I guess you would say, the main character. And I would say that she's just a badass, and I wish I was more like her in that respect. She's just a much tougher person than me. She knows a lot of things with great confidence that I'm probably long way from learning. How about you? What about your main character, Nara?
You know, Nara says whatever she thinks. And that actually came, you know, Nara is based on my daughter. She started out as the namesake for my maternal grandmother, Nara. but she quickly morphed into my eldest headstrong daughter, and Jessica would just tell you whatever she thought. So, and throughout my life, and I'm 54 now, there are times where if I had just spoken up, and so I wish I had that power. So yeah, to be brisk and I don't know, just let it all go sometimes. But I'm usually bordering on the nice side and won't say her piece or whatever. So anyway, I wish I could do that. I'm working on it.
Yeah, I have the same answer for my character. My character speaks exactly what she's thinking too often. But I'm the opposite. I will hold things inside. And so I wish that I had the courage to, I think, be more bold about what I'm saying. At least verbally, I can write it. I can't say it.
I think writing is so cathartic. And I think, Elizabeth, you touched on it, and hearing you describe your novel, I wondered, is there any part of your novel that's autobiographical?
Yeah, the long period of unemployment for sure is autobiographical. I graduated with an MBA in 2008, just a couple months after Bear Stearns collapsed and Lehman Brothers and all these companies. And I spent all of 2009 trying to find a job. I applied for between 300 and 400 jobs. I didn't get anything. I couldn't even get a part-time receptionist job, nothing. So, and then I got pregnant, and then I found myself taking care of a baby when I thought I was going to be this career person. And yeah, the book was definitely inspired by that experience, and also trying to kind of put on paper an experience that's difficult to describe, because the experience of unemployment has no timeline. Like, you could theoretically be unemployed forever. It's not like you're unemployed for 6 months or something. You could be a month, it could be a year, it could be 5 years. And trying to fit that into a story arc was really difficult, but I really wanted to talk about it because I hadn't seen a lot of books that addressed unemployment specifically.
I have a follow-up to that, Elizabeth, because I'd never seen a book where the characters, a woman is in, like aspiring to be a big business person, that part of what the storyline. And so now I didn't know that you had an MBA. So you kind of have that same, autobiographical pattern, and now you're a novelist. How did that transition? Did the book sort of bring you? Do you still think of yourself as a business person? Like, do you have people talk to you about that kind of stuff, or talk about that a little bit?
No, I mean, like, what the MBA means is basically I can read The Economist now and I mostly understand what they're talking about. But I never used my degree. It was just my bad luck, but I never did. I've been a stay-at-home mom for 10 years while I've been trying to write and publish and stuff. No, so, but I think my business background has an advantage in giving me maybe a little different way of approaching writing, or a different way of looking at the world, maybe understanding patterns or something in a slightly skewed way that I probably wouldn't see them if I had an MFA or an English degree or whatever. But yeah, no, I definitely don't think of myself as a business person, not even a little bit.
So we have someone in chat who's asking us for Robin. Can you talk about being a lawyer and how that gave way to being a fiction writer?
Hi, Cara. That's my friend Cara from Canada. I hated law school. I went to law school and loathed being in law school, round peg, square hole kind of thing. But I would say that the training of being a lawyer, probably something like MBA school, it's a way of thinking about the world. It's a language about the world, and it requires precision. So I'm sure that my life as a lawyer kind of person informs the way I put a sentence down, I'm sure, or my interest in sentences, like how the line works. I'm sure it has something to do with that. Cara did not ask me this, but I actually think my life as a figure skater and a potter also plays into that, because I find writing really, really hard. A lot of people will say, you guys probably get this all the time. Well, somebody will say, oh, you're so lucky, you get to do what you love. And I always say, that's not exactly, it's not really it. Like, so difficult for me to write even one sentence that I think is good. I'm not one of those people that can just spew beautiful lines out. But figure skating, you fall on your butt all the time. And with pottery, your things break and fall over. And so I got really good at accepting failure. And law school probably has some of that as well. You guys probably, Dianna, you probably have some things that you think inform your writing life from your past.
Yeah, part of the inspiration, or at least the understanding of these kids who lived on the streets in New York back then, comes from a job I had it was my first big girl job. And basically it was my job to get them a job. And I had a caseload of youthful offenders in South Central Los Angeles just after the riots in the 90s. And so I would go to the youth authority, and I find these kids, or they'd come up to me and ask to be in my program, and they'd done terrible things. But, they had this, they still had hope. They still knew that, they were young enough, they could get on with their lives. They could, they weren't hobbled by their pasts in a way you might expect that kids who were in gangs, their parents are missing or in jail, drug addicts. These kids have been in gangs. And they were very similar to these kids. When I was doing my research on the orphan train, all these kids hanging out of train windows and just sort of lined up on the platform. I mean, these kids had been living on the streets, filching food, knocking over purses, doing whatever they had to do to survive. And that's a lot of the reason they started rounding them up and putting them on trains too. It was, because there was at one time, there was 20,000 children living on the streets of New York City, homeless. 20,000 children. That's a lot of kids. So I think my background working with youthful offenders really informed my character Charles and his background. And it gave me a big soft spot for orphans. I think, as I continue to write and think up storylines, I'm always just attracted to orphans because they just have such tremendous, problems in front of them. They just don't even have a foundation to start their life on, so I'm always attracted to them as characters for sure. And I think that, my job in my 20s was probably a big part of that.
Dianna, I wanted to ask, can you tell us a little bit about your process of researching your novel?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll get books and I'll get old books. I'll go to wherever I'm going to set my book, I'll go to all the historical societies, all the historical places. For me, the book has to be rich with the atmosphere that you're in, the flora, the fauna, the smell. Everything's got to be there. And, in my book, and I love research too. That's one of my favorite parts. And so I'm a big nature lover. So, in my book, the wind is a character, because if you've ever lived up in, that part of the world, that cold northern wind is a real killer. So we have a question. Linda Nelson is asking, what was the publishing process like for each of you? So, okay. So, I mean, for me, it was such a different animal. I'll say that. You're at home, you're alone, you're writing your book, you're sort of in a vacuum, you're working with editors, you've got your agent, but boy, oh boy, working in publishing, it's, and a lot of these folks, for me, they were very corporate and they had a process. And so it's very mystifying. The whole, if I could just go to Harper and knock on the door and just walk around and look at everything, I'd be so ecstatic, because it's so, what they're doing without me being involved is just so mysterious. So that's what it was like for me. So how about you guys?
Elizabeth? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I had a really long path to publication. I started writing this book in 2011. I finished it in 2015. I sent it out to agents. I got an agent right away, and we went on submission, and it went out to like 40, 45 editors, and nobody ended up picking it up. The feedback that we got was that they thought it was hilarious, but they didn't know how to market it. So I put it in a drawer, and I started writing a second book. I wasn't daunted, because I said I got pretty close on my first book, and so that's a sign to me where I was like, well, you're clearly doing things right, so just write a second book. So I wrote a second book, and in the meantime, I would send this out every now and again to small presses and to contests, not expecting anything. And I sent it in 2019 to the Santa Fe Writers Project. They have a contest, and I entered it not thinking anything was going to happen. I thought I would maybe get an honorable mention or something. And to my complete surprise, I was named a finalist, and they offered me a contract for publication. And so that was how I got this book published, but it was 10 years, and I really psychically and in every other way gave up on it. And so it getting published was a total bonus.
Awesome.
How about you?
For me, I'm sure there's some writers out there on this Zoom event, and I just feel like it's so hard to find. It's so hard for us all to find the right place. And one of the things that I thought about when my first collection of stories was selected to win a fiction prize was that it was the exact same manuscript the day before and the day after they picked it, but the way you are in the world, what it feels like, is completely different the day after. And we're all just trying to find that one slot, and you just have to send out. But for me, this particular book was a real roller coaster ride, because it's the hardest thing is to find an agent. You find an agent, like, if you're lucky, and then you have to go into this next process. It's so difficult, and people just have to keep trying, just can't stop. But anyway, I got an agent, and she sent it out right before COVID hit last year. And we had some interest, and then it went silent. And so for most of last year, I thought that this work of many, many years was just dead. Like, and you can't whine too much during a pandemic and when so much is happening in the world. Although I did whine, for sure. I whined a lot. And then we did the same thing as you, Elizabeth. It ended up going to a small press, and they took it really fast. And then I have a second collection of stories, and we was like, what about this? And they took that one too. And that's how. Lucky, very lucky.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you guys never gave up either. And I know, I spent 14 years, trying to get something published, because I have another book that was completely done. And by the time I got it done, they had declared biographical fiction dead. So they do that from time to time. It's very annoying, but you just have to stick it out if you want to be a writer. You have to grow dragon scales. Saunders McNeil has a question. Can each of you talk about how your narrative and characters manifest themselves? Do they appear visually or verbally, or in a more nebulous form as a concept or feeling or some other way? And I can tell you from my point of view, my characters, I kind of sketch them out, biographically, but then they start talking to me. They'll start talking to me how they should talk, and then I'll run to a notepad and I'll write down what they say, and they sort of come to life for me in that way. So I hear voices in my head. I hear them verbally. I try to see them visually too, but most of the time they come to me, they come talking. So.
That is a super fascinating question. I think it's different with each project. Like I can't quite remember how this one came to me, but I can say like for the last few years, especially with short stories, I will get a character and a situation kind of at the same time, and I will get the beginning and the end of something. So I have a short story about a rancher who discovers a dead body in his quarry pond that came out a few years ago. And I knew at the beginning that he found the body, and I knew at the end that he was going to give the body back to the people that it belonged to, and that was going to be like a big transformative moment for him. And those things came together. I didn't have to like go find them. And I have found that the stories that I really struggle with are the ones where those three pieces are not together. Because I can muddle my way to the middle, but I can't muddle my way to the end. If I don't already know the end, then that's a story I probably am going to struggle with and maybe should not pursue. Robin, how about you?
I have a weird way of making stories that I developed out of desperation, I would say. And the way I do it is I take 2 or 3 stories that I'm interested in that have nothing to do with each other, and I put them together and let a third story or another story come up the middle. So this particular story from my novel, Pity the Beast, arose from some friends of mine, really close friends of mine who live on Lazy Mountain in Alaska. My friends John and Sherry were telling me about this horse that had gotten, this small horse that had gotten impregnated by this giant horse from the farm next door. And there was a difficult labor. And Alaskans being Alaskans, or Montanans being Montanans, or people from rural America all over the place, came up with these incredibly crazy, wild, mechanical methods of trying to keep this horse alive. The foal died, but the mare struggled on and she could not get up, and they did all these crazy things to lift this horse up. And I was fascinated by the story. And so I combined that one with another story, and then this Pity the Beast rose out of that. And that's pretty much how I write all of my stuff. I try to keep planning away because it ruins it for me if I plan, unfortunately. I hope that answers that, Saunders.
Well, I have a question for you, Elizabeth, about your book cover. It's very striking. How did you come about this cover?
Thank you. Yeah, my neighbor, Cynthia Warren, who's an amazing graphic designer, drew it. I knew that I wanted to have something that harkened back to the Mexican bingo cards, the Loteria cards. I'm Mexican American. My character's Mexican American. I grew up in South Texas on the border with Mexico. And these Loteria cards are iconic. And I wanted it to be such that the cover recalled these cards. So even if you don't know what they are, maybe the cover looks familiar to you. And yeah, she hand drew it. And this figure here is reminiscent of this one bingo card called La Sirena, which is the mermaid. And she's even got, my character is a graduate of University of Arizona. She's even got a cap and gown that are like the exact Pantone colors of the University of Arizona cap and gown. And Cynthia Warren, again, is the cover designer's name. And she is just incredible. She did such a good job with it. I'm so happy with it. Thank you for asking. I love talking about my cover.
How about you, Robin? How did you guys come up with that cover? I love the abstraction of it. The really draw me in.
I didn't really have that much to do with it. my first book, I really wanted the cover to be involved with the cover. This time I just said, I want it to look like a Western, and I want it to be beautiful. I'm not a visual artist, so take it from there. And it's like, the thing that I love about it is that my book is pretty wild. Like, there's some wild stuff in this book. And there's a little horse that you'll appreciate, Dianna, because it's, a wild horse. It's running on the S. It's running over the top of the S. And somebody looked at it and said, I think we have to change that, because there's the horse looks like it's running on the S. And I said, no, I like that. I want I want the horse on the S.
Oh, there's your cover.
Oh yeah, there it is. I don't know if you can see the little horse on there.
Oh yeah, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's really nice. I mean, I like it a lot. Thank you.
Great. Loved it.
I have a question for you, Elizabeth. So I loved the scenes of this sort of support group in your book that appear sort of every so often. The character goes to this group with all these crazy characters who are sort of down and out, but they're really supportive of each other, and they're really funny. Can you talk about how that came into being, and how it works for you in the book?
Yeah, I said I spent all of 2009 being unemployed, and I spent a ridiculous amount of time going to networking seminars and job seeker support groups, pink slip mixers, job hobnob. I mean, I can't even remember what all these things were called. We also had just moved to the San Francisco Bay Area. And I would go to these things and see the same people. And I was like, how am I supposed to get a job? Everybody in this room is unemployed. We're all looking for a job. Like, it didn't make any sense to me then. It doesn't make any sense to me now. And it was such a bizarre, surreal situation. I was like, that's got to go in the book. And then, yeah, the advantage of having a support group is that you're able to bounce your character off of these other people, right? I mean, that's the benefit of putting your character in a room with anybody. And especially if your character doesn't want to be there and doesn't want to be in the room with these people, then like that's even better. And then you have more of a potential for conflict and all of that great stuff. So yeah. Robin, I had a question for you about the language in your book. Your language is, your sentences are so fascinating to me. How do you start out writing in that really specific poetic way, or do you work towards that over time?
I revise endlessly. So I definitely do not start out with anything that you see now. I revise kind of obsessively and over and over and over, to the point where I'm distraught with frustration. But no, I cannot. I work towards the language. But thank you very much for saying that, because it means a lot to me. I felt that way about both of your books. Just beautifully wrought language, totally different from each other. Because I think, Elizabeth, you are a master of comedy, and the way you mix the book, and Dianna, your book is so rich with intense feelings and these really beautiful complexity of this family situation. We've been working hard, I guess.
So
yeah,
I was kind of chuckling as you were talking about how you edited and edited and edited. I kept thinking about that old, I don't know who coined this, but you take the comma out in the morning and you put the comma back out in the afternoon.
Yeah, books are never finished, they're only abandoned.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And then it gets copy edited, and then you're like, oh, you know.
It looks like we've got another question, guys. You ready?
Yep.
Tim Sutton. All three authors mentioned how events in their lives relate to their novels. How have contemporary events or politics entered your stories or affected your writing, if at all?
I can start out. So I mentioned I started a second book in 2016, and I'm just finishing it now. And this book is set along the Texas-Mexico border, and it's set in the 1890s and the 1960s. So it's not contemporary, but absolutely the events of the last 5 years that have been happening on the border and the political vitriol that's been going on 100% influenced the book. I think that if things in 2016 had gone a different way, the book would be different. But of course, you internalize everything that's happening around you and the things that you're worried about and the things that you're seeing, and 100% that has gone into the book. Yeah.
I think in mine, I tried to pull out historical events and politics that kind of matched up to today. You know, when I talk about the Irish in my book and how they were, you know, put down, and they were the large wave of immigration at that time. And as always, there's always, you know, a lot of prejudice, racism that goes around, and the Irish were thought to be lazy and on the dole. And so you watch Patrick struggling against not only the barrier of being a train rider, but he's also Irish. And the moment he opens his mouth, people are prejudiced against him. And so it kind of reminded me of, you know, the border issues. And I just wanted to kind of remind everybody, and Nara does say this to Ivor Magnuson in the book. She says, hey, it wasn't too long ago, it was your grandparents. You know what I mean? And that was my point in the book was, you know, look, it cycles. Just read any history book, you know. It was our grandparents at one time. It was the Italians. It was the, you know what I mean? So we're just, I don't know, that was something that came out in there. And also, you know, I'm an independent, but my family is rural conservative. And there were so many attitudes in the book that I wanted to help people understand rural conservatives, because they are not bad people. They just live in low density areas and they just value different things from government. And we can't lump them all into one big, you know, batch. So anyway, there was quite a few things that Papa would say in the book, because, you know, just, you know, place matters. Where you are, it really matters what you want from your government. And so to that extent, I just wanted people to understand that, you know, hey, we're not bad people. We just want different things. So.
I guess I feel like my writing is always pretty political. It's just not overtly, probably a lot like your book, Elizabeth, where, you know, you're interacting with a current atmosphere on the border. For me, I feel like didn't go about the whole thing of writing a Western, like, oh, it arose the way I described. The story came up and it was a farm, like a ranch farm, rural, and et cetera. It proceeds. I've written space stories and urban stories. I don't really prefer one over the other, but to me, the American Western is a genre that has been dominated by men, and it has certain things in it that are really part of the American psyche, I would say the American myth, and I'd say they're quite unexamined over time. I think people are starting to examine it more, but I think that my book definitely attempts to flip some stuff about the Western on its head. I hope it does. Examine some of the things that people don't really think about. You know, a lot of the characters in the book who are the main actors are female, for example, and this idea of manifest destiny, like, what are we doing? What have we done? Why are we in these places? It's uncomfortable to talk about some of that stuff, but I hope that the book opens that kind of discussion up. I hope so. So that's a really big contemporary political question, but it's people are wearing Levi's and cowboy hats all over the world. And I think that that's important to think about. So I think we're running out of, we would love more questions from you people out there if you have any.
Does anybody, I think we're actually at our time as well.
Yep, we are.
9 p.m. there.
What a wonderful conversation, you three. This was like, I loved it. Yeah, if we're comfortable kind of winding down, yes, audience, if you have a question, put it in the Q&A right now, and I'll go through my goodbye spiel here. But thank you, Elizabeth, Dianna, and Robin. Enormous thank you for being with us today, this evening, and endless congratulations on your debut novels. It sounds like the three of them were, a long time coming. So I'm so happy for you. Thank you, audience, for being here and asking great questions, engaging with these authors. And thank you again to our event sponsor, Arts Missoula, for this year's sponsorship. And just as a reminder, I know you guys have been seeing it in the chat throughout this hour, but you can purchase these novels at Fact and Fiction Books. Be sure to enter MBF at checkout, whether that's at factandfictionbooks.com or whether you say that code vocally in store here in Missoula, Montana. 20% of all festival title sales will come back to the festival so that we can continue programming like this. So thank you again, the three of you, for being here.
Thank you for having us.